I can't sing, but I love. Hello, everybody. Well, we were just having a funny moment off camera as it went online. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Tamara. I've got one of my favorite coffee mugs with me today, which is the Northern Lights from Alaska, which I saw once. So amazing. Thank you for being here. So listen up, audience, whether you're watching live now and you get to ask questions, which, by the way, that's just a little bit reminder for all you out there that you have the ability to pipe in and ask questions. So if you're watching live now or you're listening to this across any one of the million podcast players that we go live or that we stream on, I want you to really listen up to today's interview because I'm really excited for this conversation, partially because I think in the world we're in, what we're about to dive into is so important to so many of us. There's a few angles, actually. And I think you're going to find these moments when you listen to today. Have you ever had these moments, Justin? I know you have. It's this moment. Ready? Right? Where something just speaks to you. I think we're going to have a few of those today. So Justin Jones-Fosu is an incredible sought-after keynote speaker. He's the author of some books that we're going to dig into today. His work is really important because it's about finding meaning or creating meaning in work and about having real and sometimes hard conversations, and which to me is really about connection and meaning with each other, not just with ourselves. So Justin, let me just stop and say welcome to the show.
I am super pumped to be here with you. Woo! Thank you so much.
I love it. Also, I've been told that Justin sings, so maybe we'll get a little bit of that later. So here's what I wanted to start with, because the minute I heard you say it, so as anyone who's listened long enough knows, I tend to research. So it's not, I don't have a lot of canned questions. I look up stuff and it's something makes me go, huh. Like then I'm like, I need to ask more about that. You said something and I think you say in a lot of your keynotes, and it's in the work that you do, Work.Meaningful, right? It's really important. And you said, it's not about finding meaning in our work. It's about bringing meaning to our work. I think now more than ever, we're looking for purpose and connection to the thing that we do for most hours of the day. So will you talk, just let's start off by talking a little bit about, or a lot about what that means and why that's so important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is, as I've listened to people, I was studying really purpose and meaningful work for over 10 years. And as I was digging deeper into the research, it was one of the top 10 things for millennials and became a top 3 thing for Gen Z. But the way it was often talked about was from a place of finding meaning in your work. It's almost like, have you found meaning in your work? And so it was based upon leadership or what projects or tasks were people doing, or was the company sustainable, right? And so it's all these external things. But I had a challenge, and I was like, why do we have to find something outside of us to bring meaning? Like, not everybody's going to be able to find that quote unquote unicorn job or that perfect situation that's quote unquote meaningful. But can we still be meaningful in that? And what that led me down is some really powerful research, 2001, Rizaniski and Sutton, called job crafting. And in that job crafting research, I was able to find this place of like where people are able to craft, no matter where they were, meaning in their work. And I thought, no matter where you are, and even in my own journey, right? I had some jobs that I did not care for, some ones that I was waiting till 5 o'clock, like, is it time to go? And it wasn't until I started taking ownership for my own journey that I remembered those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I brought meaning in those moments. And it took me a while to get there. But that's the whole concept of it. It's not about finding meaning, which is an external approach, but rather bringing meaning, which is an inside out approach. And that no matter where you are, you can bring meaning. And I was one of the first subjects of my own research.
So will you give us a real-time story of that? Either that's yours or someone that you've worked with or an audience, person who shares a story with you, because, I can imagine like that. It sounds so good to me. And I'm fortunate, right? I get to interview people like you all day and do things that I love. But I've also been in jobs that were jobs or great careers, but maybe I didn't have that connection to the company. They didn't provide me with a purpose. So I had to work hard to create meaning so that I not just enjoyed what I did, but also provided value, because I wanted to be good at what I did too. It's not that I didn't, but I struggled with that. So yeah.
And you're like most people, and you're like me at times, right? So One of the things I found, I go back to work for a top financial firm, and I was in corporate training and development and global HR. And I had just left working from a really well-known French store named Target. And at Target, I was a store manager as Target, for those who didn't get that. And
I got
after I
it.
left, I went from managing a team of 50
Yeah.
to leading a team of one, which was just myself. And I felt unfulfilled. I felt like
Mm.
I wasn't, producing things that were valuable. I started questioning my own journey, my own time. They had just let go my favorite manager, who was my mentor. And so all these things around me, I was allowing to impact my work. And I was in HR and I was put on the performance improvement plan. And so all these things were happening, and my work was struggling, my performance was struggling.
Mm.
I mean, all these things. And there's a series of things that happened, but really two questions came to mind, because I finally started to take ownership. And the first question I asked myself was, Justin, what do you want to get out of this experience? No matter if I stay here for the rest of my journey or my life, what did I want to get out of this experience? And the second question, and I want to ask you, is who is the only person that you and I can control?
Yeah.
Our
Ourselves.
kids.
Yeah.
Our kids, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm joking, because I've tried that, it doesn't work. But
Especially teenage boys. I've tried
I
so
still
hard.
try. But ourselves, like, we are the only
Yeah.
person that we can control. And it was at that moment for me that I started asking, okay, what are ways that I can make this work? Meaning, I didn't say those words, but I started to take
Yeah.
ownership. And so I got involved with, at that time, the diversity committee. I was kind of voluntold by one of my another mentor, to get involved. I started doing things like my learning, when we were starting just to customize kind of micro e-learning things for employees. I started to lead our cancer walk. And so I started to do things and get involved and try to bridge the gap of relationships with people that allow me to bring meaning to my work, where I got to the point where I was taking off the performance improvement plan, and even they get ready to promote me before I transitioned to another organization. But here's the thing. When I talk about the three rhythms that we've crafted from the job crafting research, is that there's three rhythms that we can actually employ to bring meaning to our work. Number one is a perspective rhythm, how we choose to see things, right? So I wasn't just an employee. I now was a conduit for better experiences for people and training and the workplace. Two is the task rhythm, what we choose to do. So we're going to get involved in the diversity committee, getting involved for the cancer walk. And three was the relationship rhythm, and that's who do you choose to engage. And so as I intentionally sought out lunch meetings with people to get their perspective and learn, and I reached out to my other mentors to learn about what I should do, and had some golf meetings and all these things, it allowed me to create a rhythm that I owned, and I took ownership rather than allowing it to happen to me. So even in the most challenging of moments, I was able to bring meaning to my work. I didn't have that language then, but that's
Right.
for me, it's an example I draw upon.
So there's a couple things I want to highlight that I think you said are really important. One is you can take ownership of how you create purpose in your work. So that's number one. And I do think we're often looking for, or the way it's talked about in the media, at least in the news, is, people seek purpose, and you as the leader are supposed to create that purpose for the person. And I think
Yeah.
that's creating a lot of conflict in work, because leaders are back going, well, they don't value what I value. I don't know how to do this. So, and you know what, figure it out. Right. So that's creating
Yeah.
conflict. But also what it makes me think is perhaps the leader's job, or the company's job, or the external's job, is to create the space for you, Justin, or me, Tamara, whomever it is, to apply purpose. So that, you said you led the cancer walk, you did all these things, right? I think there's a place in that of, is there room for it?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
From a leadership, so we talk with leaders all the time about um, how do you help your people to bring meaning to their work, right?
Mm.
One of the things I'm big against, leaders and organizations, they don't engage their employees. And I don't mean that they can't, like they don't, in terms of they physically can't, but they can't, right? I can only choose to engage myself. I've studied many of the top engaging, highly engaged, great places to work, all these kind of things. And there's still people who are not engaged. Why? Because engagement is an ownership. It's a
Yeah.
personal ownership thing. Now, leaders, we're like greenhouses. We can create the best environment for things to
Great
be
way to
able to
say it.
grow
Yeah.
rather than making something grow. And so the first thing is realizing that we just create the environment. How do we do that? One is on our one-on-ones, right, with our direct reports and other people. Are we asking the questions about what people value? What things are meaningful for people? What are some things that make people smile and give them great joy? And identifying ways to build that into their job description, or at least a part of it, or engage them in something to that degree. Those are some of the things that the key leaders can do. But I think as leaders, the number one thing we can do is lead by example. Is we can share how we're bringing meaning to our work, even in the toughest of moments. Justin Jones-Fosu, I have to, with my team, whether here and in Ghana, I have to be very vulnerable about these moments that I really just don't enjoy.
Yeah.
There's a point to this, but that are super meaningful. And we've often confused it too. We've confused meaning and happiness. I'm not a happiness researcher. I want you to be
Totally
happy.
with
I
you
love,
on that. Yeah.
but there's certain things that we do that are super valuable and meaningful that might not bring an immediate smile to our face. And so we as leaders have to talk about those things, the things that we do, so that we can give our people the liberty and the freedom to be able to do those things as well.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I think there's a lot about, so I love the field I'm in. I love the work that we do. And there are a lot of things about my job that I do not love at all,
Yeah.
actually. And they bring me no joy in the moment in any way whatsoever. Like I don't enjoy anything in Excel spreadsheets ever. I have to do them. It's just not my jam ever, but I have to do it, right? I don't get to avoid it. However,
Right.
what I found is those things that I have to do that I don't want to do, if I understand their contribution to the bigger picture, then I'm
Yes.
not only am I more willing to do them, but I put more effort into them. And
Yeah.
I think that I used to do this with clients. Well, we still do it with clients all the time is we used to do these contribution maps. So it wasn't your title, but you take the same org chart, but instead of, your title and my title, it's how you
Yeah.
contribute to the bigger objective and how I contribute to the bigger objective. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes as a leader, we lose sight of that, right? We see our teams as whether we're small and everybody's virtual or we're a big company, we attach them to their job description and they don't understand, hey, okay, so you are the person who answers the phone and routes the calls, but that's really important because you're the brand when the person calls, right? You're the first person they talk to. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I think people lack an understanding of contribution and that lowers engagement drastically.
Oh, 100%. And this is my thing to leaders. Leaders are riddled with so many things to do, right? So it's not an intentional. I'm not going to connect people to the overall
Right.
arching value and outcomes. That's not leader. Leaders really want to do the best work that they can. Most leaders, the best work they can, connecting people to purpose and value. But it's intentionally choosing to realize that work is just as valuable as the dotted lines on people's job descriptions. Connecting people to seeing how their work overall will reach the end user, makes somebody's life better. I mean, I just came from speaking for a home and hospice
Mm,
association. And one of the things is like, you can say, oh, Justin, that's easy because they're caring for people's lives. But just like you and I, we get to help people, but sometimes we can actually start operating from autopilot and
yeah.
we aren't connected to the value that we can have. And that's one of the things I do a thing called why stories. And in why stories is before I get on stage, before I start entering into consulting or working with someone, I go back through my emails, through my memory banks, through direct messages on LinkedIn and other places. And I go back to the people that have said how the work has impacted them, how it's made them better,
Mm,
the conversations I had after the presentation,
yeah.
because that helps to recenter me as I go into the conversation. So for leaders, sometimes maybe once a month or once a quarter, it's bringing the story back to why we're here. How does everybody's job contribution connect to the overarching value and or what he provide? And it has to be a real value, right? I've seen some people try to utilize this as really more of an influence technique or tactic.
Right, right,
Um,
yeah.
but the true value of, if it's just about it makes somebody a little bit more efficient, why does it make them more efficient? It makes them more efficient so they can be able to be more present with their families. Excellent, right? Well, we have to get to that why and make sure that it's very genuine and not something because we went to a workshop and said, I have to connect them to a value. So what value do we connect to? So that's the first thing for leaders. And the second thing is identifying the values that are important for your direct reports and the people that you serve with. because if you can uh, attach and gain those values, you might be able to find ways to bring in some of the things that they value into some aspect of the work. It may not be every day, but some aspect of the work, like Justin, the cancer walk, right? That was very
Yeah.
important to me in getting involved. That ended up leading it for the whole company. And it's because that was important to me. And somebody I knew had cancer and struggled with that. And so I was able to connect, and my leader gave me liberty, not to do it every day, but to have that as part of my daily or part of my activities that I did while I was at the company.
It's so interesting. It's going to sound like a tangent, but go with me for a second here. As you were
Please.
saying about what matters to people, what people value, it made me think of negotiation tactics because I was just doing this with someone. There's someone who owes company money, and they're delayed and delayed, and they got a lot of excuses. And so we created kind of three options for them, right? They can pay now at discounted rate, they can pay later, but the full amount, so they get time, right? So either they value the discount, the less money, they value the time, or a third one, which was about payment options because maybe they value consistency. But part of the
Right.
reason we did that is we wanted to understand, what does the person on the other side of this negotiation value? I don't know. Like, I personally would value the money and I would take the middle one, but maybe that's not them, and that's okay. So, but I know that sounds crazy, but to me, that's exactly what you're saying is, all right, does this person value being recognized? Does this person value being able to have dinner with their family? Does this
Yes.
person value, like, whatever it is? And in fact, I had a client once who worked at a soda company, and she said, I know what I do isn't curing cancer, but it
Yeah.
does allow me to be home at night, and that
Yeah.
matters to me. And I was like, all right, okay, I get it now. I get why you're so like passionate about your job. It's actually because
Yeah.
of something else. Have you ever, I'm just curious, have you ever heard any values from people that you found surprising? Because you do workshops and stuff too, right? So this
Yeah.
stuff must come up. Is there anything that you're like, well, I did not expect that?
Yeah. There's been some very interesting hobbies, to say the least, that people really enjoy, whether that's knife throwing, having
Oh,
times to do that. You know what's very interesting, actually? There was one guy that started, we're at the same financial firm, and I remember interviewing him for one of my books, and he was super passionate about the band, right? And he was playing in a band, he loved music, all these kind of things. And I was like, hey, like, why aren't you doing this full time? You seem to love it. And he's like, Justin, I don't want to do it full time, because if I do it full time, it now becomes my full time
yeah.
responsibility. And I think I can fall out of love with it. But what he valued was, like, I just want the steadiness of what I'm doing. I don't want to be promoted anymore.
Mhm.
I'm not after more compensation. I want a consistent schedule so I can be there for my family and play in my band.
Mm.
And that was like, okay, right? Because we often think, and there's some organizations and actually even industries, that it's either get promoted, or move out, rather than allowing people to still challenge themselves. He had
Mm.
stretch assignments and
That's
things that he
interesting.
learned, but he was very comfortable in the place where he was, and he didn't want to go any higher. He didn't want necessarily more compensation or pay. He was
Mm.
content where he was, because what he valued wasn't more money, it wasn't a higher title. What he valued was more time with his family, more time playing in the band as his intentional hobby. So those are things that I've seen, whether knife throwing or not, but that people
Yeah.
really lean into.
So, but I think what you're saying is really interesting because it made me just realize that I think our culture really does, at least in the US, we really promote ambition. And I'm one of
Yes.
those people. I am that person, right? I'm type A. I'm always trying to get to the next level. Like, I get it. But I think in any job too, we look at someone, if that someone isn't striving for,
Yeah.
that big ambitious next level, then we see them as lacking in some way. And
Yeah.
it makes me pause and realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe Bob over here is going to be amazing in his job, and he's always
Yeah.
going to do his best because that's where he wants to be, and not,
Yes.
so that just kind of blew my mind. I hope if you're out there listening that you really think about how you're thinking about people, especially for those type A people like me who are like, if you're not striving and setting goals, you're a loser, right? That's not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And I think it's in those conversations, right? And so our
Yeah.
conversations with our people, like, one of the things we do with our company, we have a once a month care call where we
Mhm.
don't do anything about business. It's just, how are
I
you
love that.
doing? How are you doing mentally, emotionally, physically? We talk about self-care. That's why we have Monday through Thursday, right? And so Friday's designed for self-care, for people to really lean into that intentionally. And when we do our care calls, we're asking, how's your self-care going? Right. But we're
Mhm.
hearing what's important to people, so that I, as a person, can be able to lean into that for our team. And so for
Yeah.
leaders, one of the things is, in those moments, maybe you're not able to do a care call with your team or a care meeting where you're just talking, but in your one-on-ones, are you saying, hey, look, before we jump into the assignments and the projects and all that stuff, how are you doing? Right? Like, outside of business, like, how's life? Right? And they may not respond initially, because there may never have been a supervisor that's really genuinely asked that question. Right? And so they may be like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, what's this person's angle? What are they trying to get out of me? But if we're consistent in that, and asking that, and leaning into that, and sharing how we're doing, right, in everyday life, it allows people to lean into that. So I 100% agree with you that I've met over and over again some people that have said, I am content where I am. I don't mind
Yeah.
stretch assignments. I don't mind new projects. I don't mind all those things, but I don't want to be promoted. I'm okay with the compensation, because I really truly value this. Now, I'm gonna give you the one small story for that.
Yeah.
A woman named Nona. I love Nona because I remember Nona was working really hard, doing great for the company. I mean, she had the ambition, and she came home one day, and her husband, they share duties. I mean, all these things. So I want to be very clear on that. They share duties. They do a lot of things. He was actually doing a lot more in the house with the kids and things. And he was like, no, he's like, you're really killing that work. She was like, yeah, really kind of patting herself on the back. He was like, I wish you took that same energy towards our family.
Oh. Oh.
And it hit her hard, right? Now, the only
Bet.
reason he could say that is because he was doing a lot in the house and with the kids. Like, he wasn't the person that was doing his own thing and expected her to do it, right? So he was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
leading in that
You're
way.
like, why don't you bring home the bacon and then
Right.
fry it up in the pan, right?
But in that, it hit her
Mm.
so hard that she started figuring out ways to create boundaries. She had a great manager, John, and she said, hey, John, I want to come in earlier, because every day I need to be off at 4. I need to be able to pick my kids up from school, and unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to be on late at night, and my phone's going to be off on the weekends. And so she was like, I'll take less lunch, a little bit less lunch, so I can get my work done and productive and all these kind of things. She almost took like well, if you remember the movie, Pursuit of Happiness, she almost took the
Mhm.
Pursuit of Happiness approach,
Mm.
where she
Mm.
get stuff done so that I can do the things that matter the most to me. Now, what ended up happening? Nona did such great work, even within the boundaries that she created, that they ended up promoting her, right?
So
Because she did such great work.
there's 2 things about that I think are really important that I just wanna pull out.
Yeah.
One is, and as someone who owns a small company, something, and has been a leader in larger organizations, I really appreciate it. If someone comes to me and says, "I wanna change something, and here's
Yeah.
how I've thought about how to balance it." So,
Yeah.
I've had employees come to me and say, "I wanna be done by 4." And so I'm
Yeah.
100% for it, by the way. Like, I have 2 teenage boys. Like,
Yeah.
I want you to spend time with your kids. I want you to yeah. Oh, it's a household. And, like, I want you to do your hobbies. You don't even you need to have kids or be married. Like, go do life. Life is out
Yes.
there. So, but what frustrates me is when they come to me and just say, "I want that." And I'm going,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, how do I need to like there are things that I've got to consider. So how do we figure this out?" And I love that your example with Nona, that she came and said, "Hey, here's what I need and here's how I can compensate." And I think for all of
Yes.
us listening who are out there going, "I want to find more purpose. I want more balance. I want, to make myself a priority. I want more kind of, mental wellness, for lack of a better way to say it." Amazing. And present it in a way that shows that you're thinking about it from the other person's perspective as well. I think that's really, really
Yeah.
important. And then the other thing I just want to say on that is, it's funny you said she got promoted. Those boundaries are so important for our brain because we carry
Yes.
around like meeting to task to task to meeting to objective to problem to meeting to interaction. And we just carry that bag of poop around with us all day
Yeah.
long, and then we can't think. So
Yes.
those breaks are actually healthier for us. We'll be more productive if we break. So I think we forget
Yes.
that. But I want to highlight that, Justin. Keep talking because that's it's so important that we have all that, I think.
Yeah. And I want to highlight one third thing is, she had a
Yeah.
really good manager.
It
There's
helps.
not all managers that would have created the space for her to come in early because she realized if she was there an hour and a half, 2 hours before everybody else got in, she was able to get a lot more work done
I mean, that is
than
my day every day.
yeah, right. So I like John, like amazing manager, great. He was a great example for me to see how he led, or really from a heart-based approach, and try to work within that, right? And it's one of the things that we
Yeah.
often say to our clients, but we also say with internally, it's like treat them like family, right? That's one of our actually our work family values. And when you do that, you ask, how can I give more to people than I ask from them? And
Mhm.
that's as a leader, we should always constantly asking, how am I giving more to my people rather than asking from them? Because it's, that value proposition where people feel like, wow, I mean, you've been to the places like from a service perspective where you felt you got something more than what you
Mhm.
gave them in compensation, and you
Mhm.
felt good about it, right? And while we can't always 100% of time feel that at work, because there's sometimes where it's just a really tough project or really challenging, do we know our manager, our leader really cares about us, that they genuinely want the best for us, right? And are willing to sacrifice on their own selves in order for us to achieve. Like that's for me, that's the powerful role of a leader. But that's again the greenhouse. That's how we
Yeah.
create the best environments, our care for our people, knowing that they care, telling them to go home, telling them to stop working, right? Our director of operations has not been feeling well. And we had a call yesterday, had several meetings. And I said, Dari, we have a book launch April
No.
16th coming up, right? Like literally on Tuesday. I said, Dari, stop working, go rest because I need you. Your health is way more important than even this
Yeah.
book launch, right? And so, like, what you're not able to do, let me know. I'll pick up the slack. I'll work a little bit later so I can get that stuff done. But those are the things as leaders, when we give more to our people, that we're able to actually, it's weird, but they're willing to actually do more and give more because they realize we genuinely care.
So I've got 2 great questions that just came in from different angles. You ready for them? So good.
Please.
I love these questions. Okay, the first one is from, Caitlin, and Caitlin asks, "How do I do that as a leader without creating a culture of entitlement? I sometimes get concerned that I give them so much slack or room that then they expect it, and then it becomes a problem." I love that
Yeah,
question
I
because
love.
that's the question that people don't want to admit as leaders that they're worried about. Thank you for that.
Yeah. No, Caitlin, I think you're spot on. It is a genuine question. One of the things that we've had to balance, because I've had that same question too, is I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm doing all these things Monday through Thursday with a 32-hour work week. We first start off with 40 hours in 4 days and then 32. Is we've had to realize we have to continue to reiterate the values that we provide
Mhm.
as a company. Right. And so we can't just do it once and be like, all right, we're done, because now as people get used to it, they may think like, oh, wait a minute, like, well, what's next? What else do I get? Right. And so we're
Yeah.
consistently asking the question, or we're consistently bringing back, hey, these are the things that we're providing. These are the things, just as a reminder for one, ourselves, but also them to realize what are the great benefits that we're providing. Two, it's, and this is like even a slippery slope of disagreement, right? We almost don't want to even admit that somebody else has something of value because we're afraid that they're just going to keep going
Mhm.
and that we're going to get taken
Yeah.
advantage of and we're not going to be in a position that we think we should be. And I have to lean into that and say, it could be some people could take advantage of it, right? There are some people, but a
Always.
vast majority of people, what I found, vast majority of people actually appreciate it, will value it, even if there's one or two that don't. Now, let me say this why. We end up creating not boundaries, rules for the one or two,
Isn't
rather
that the
than
truth?
creating a space for the many that will never abuse it. And so
That is
I've
so true.
learned that there's more growth, the more upside, more abundance on planning for the multitude who will actually utilize it, who will appreciate it, who won't take advantage of it, who won't
Yes.
lead to a place of entitlement, rather than the one or two there might be. Now, if those one or two do, I have to have a conversation, right? We're gonna in our
Yeah.
one-on-ones, we're talking about, hey,
Yeah.
like here are the things that I'm doing, here are the things. But if you build that into the regular rhythm of what you do, whether on a quarterly meeting or talking about, I'm really grateful that we're seeing this, because large majority of companies aren't providing a 4-day work week or aren't providing care calls or aren't. providing opportunities to pay for whatever those things are, we can plan for the many rather than one or two.
I love that you mentioned that, because I do think that's how we operate. I know I've been guilty of that, where I'm making rules and decisions based on two people that where there's 30 who are great and I've got two people, so therefore, right, suddenly I'm like, you must clock your time on Thursday at 4, so I know that you spent the full day. Like, and these people are going, really, I think it leads to an erosion of trust, don't you think, over time?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's ebbs and flows of that, right? There's been situations where I was like, oh, do we have high trust here? But if there's high trust, we're able to come back to that place and realize, like, this person really does want to do the best. Let me give you a study that supports this. In 1968, there's a study by Rosenthal and Jacobson, right? You may be familiar, but some of your listeners may not be. In this study, they researched a group of teachers. And this group of teachers, they gave them a list of the most gifted students in their classroom. Now, at the end of the year, as expected, the most gifted students excelled, right? They were the best students. Why? Not because they were best students, but because they were on the gifted list. They chose the list at random. So what ended up happening is, in choosing the list at random, one thing that happened was the doorbell rang. And in that list of random, the teachers looked at themselves when they weren't leading well, or when the student wasn't producing, and they say, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do better, right? And so the other part of that is that when the students weren't performing well, they charged it to their effort, those who are on a gifted list. They said to them, like, you're better than this. You can do it. You're able to achieve. But those who weren't achieving, they charged it, whether consciously or subconsciously, to their ability. It's like, like, they can't do it. And they were thinking that here. And that's our same conversation with those that we lead. It's one is, do you see all of your team members, those that you lead, as the best employees ever for your team, for your organization? Because how you see your people will likely be how they become. Because you'll start doing things, even sometimes subconsciously, that will lead to, well, they probably can't do it, so let me not give them a stretch assignment. They probably aren't going to be able to do this, so let me not add them to this project. The very same things that would cause them to excel are the things that we're withholding from them, whether consciously or subconsciously. So how you see your people matters.
Isn't that study fascinating?
It is
fascinating to me that, and it's so much at that kind of, unconscious level that we do to the people around us, whether that's our kids or our teams or even ourselves, frankly, that is based on almost nothing, really. I mean, it's not reality. It's what you decide to make of it. So okay, let me get to this other question. And then I want to talk about your books. I really want to spend a lot of time on conversations as well. The question is, I love this because it's the opposite. So Maggie wants to know, help, how do I get my managers to see that spending time and effort on adding meaning to our work is important? Don't think my bosses see it this way right now. Great question. I love questions, by the way, thank you, from people who maybe don't feel like they have the authority or the title, but have the desire.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, right? Because everybody is in a different space, especially with power differentials, to be able to engage their manager in that type of way. Now, one, there's a really good book, a good source of books in terms of leading up. And so there may be some really practical strategies on how you can lead up. But I've had to realize something, right? Because everybody's situation is different. So this is a very gray answer because I don't know what the exact situation, what the relationship is with the manager. Is there built-in trust? Has that person given you the liberty to share that? I'm going to assume no based upon the question. But one is showing in your meetings how meaningful it is for you. So talking about it openly, sharing about how meaningful work and what the things that you do are valuable to you. When they ask you, how are you doing? Don't just give a surface level response like, oh, I'm great. Talk about like, oh, I had a great weekend. Some of the things I valued, I was able to do, like spend more time with my family, like go to dinner with my partner, spend time walking with the dog, right? Like those is, and as you're starting to plant those seeds, you're modeling the behavior. We can model the behavior for our leaders, right? And if there's an appropriate relationship, and when I mean trust, where you can have the conversation, it might be a suggestion, right? So we even talk about this in this disagreement language. in terms of what they call, I'm forgetting the name right now, but essentially sharing it in a way that's not an absolute. Like, have you
Mm-hmm.
considered,
Yeah.
what do you think could happen if we did? What are your thoughts on, right? Rather than coming to them and saying, hey, we don't do enough about meaningful work. Can we talk about how meaning impacts? Because now a person might be on defense mode, right? And so it's called hedging. Sorry, it just came to me, hedging.
Yeah.
So when we hedge our conversations and we mention it like, hey, I was really reading a book about meaningful work and it seems really inspiring. Like, what are your thoughts? Like our team
Mhm.
engaging more in a conversation around meaningful work. Like, do you think that's something that could be valuable? Like, what do you, and planting the seed in that type of way, those are ways that we're able to do it. So one, modeling the behavior, and two, hedging our conversation in what could be, what do you think about this? I was inspired when I read X. Those could be entry points into conversations with leaders who might currently not communicate its value. See, and I want to be very clear, unless a person says, I don't value it, we don't know if they value it or not. It just might not be something that is either one, registered in their brains, and or two, so much could be going on that's being thrown at them that they may sometimes just need a reminder. Think about all of the things of us that we need reminders of, whether parents or spouses or just members in our community, that we know are things that are important that we just don't do. And so sometimes that subtle hedging of a reminder can be helpful on whether we think they believe in it or not.
First, I think it's so well, it doesn't surprise me anymore. It used to surprise me when you'd be in a meeting and the one person would say, everybody be posturing and their peacock feathers would be out and everybody knows everything about their business. And then one person goes, I don't know, but I'm going to go find
Yeah.
out. And suddenly it is like everybody else has permission, right, to say, I don't know. And then the real conversation happens. So Maggie, to you,
Yes.
I hope you'll do what Justin's saying and be the first person, because I'm always amazed at what happens around the room when the first person says, I don't know, I'm bringing this purpose. I'm excited about this, right? Or bring some personal conversation to the table. Um,
Yeah.
it changes the game for everybody, but somebody has to go first.
Yeah. I
It's so
love that.
cool. Okay, so I want to dig into your book, though. I respectfully disagree. And that's the name of the book, by the way. If anyone who's listening, they're like, why is she disagreeing with him? He hasn't said anything yet. But and this is really part of one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because you and I were talking about this just a little bit offline, is, you know, a lot of people talk about the discord, and particularly in the US right now, and how it's at an all-time high. And, like, we can't even have conversations with people. And when we disagree, it's like line is drawn in the sand. And whether
Right.
that's because of politics or whatever, like, side you're on. And I contend that the media makes us sound worse than we really are one-on-one.
I agree.
But I do think that understanding how to have those type of conversations is really important. I wonder sometimes if the discord is there partially because it becomes attached to our identity, which is a shame, but
Yeah.
also because we don't know how to have those conversations. We know how to not agree. We know how to argue. We know how to not like someone, but we don't
Right.
know how to be okay not agreeing or having those being open that way. So tell us all about the book, why you wrote it, and then let's dig into the pillars and some of the meat in it.
Yeah. So there's really three reasons why I wrote this book. Number one is my mom. She did not ask me to write the book, but my mom was that catalyst. She was one of the first Black female air traffic controllers in the Air Force. And I
Wow.
remember, like, in growing up, my mom would make my brother and I, she was a single mom, really, awesome woman. Um, she would make us not only go to events we didn't know a lot about, but she would make us go to events that we disagreed with.
Mm.
And I remember, like, sitting there, why are we here? Like, we don't even agree with that, right? But what she was doing is she was planting these seeds of humanity in us. And I remember interviewing my mom for my last book. And I was like, my mom, where does mindset come from for you? And she would share that there was sometimes she'd be stationed in Japan for 2 years. And there were some soldiers in that same 2-year time frame who never left their home base.
Wow.
And she was like, Justin, I don't want you to be like that. I want you and your brother to leave your home base to experience the beauty of people and cultures around you. So number one, like, my mom was planting the seeds in me. Number
Mhm.
two, as the last book, The Inclusive Mindset, we would do workshops and do kind of these cohort models. And I would always make the statement, whether in presentations or not, I would make the statement that I believe to be true, that we can vehemently disagree with someone's ideology and yet still passionately pursue their humanity.
Mm.
And there was always this audible, like, "Ooh, ah," right? Like even what you just did, right? That's always what would happen. And then people would come out afterwards and they would be like, "See, like, Justin, I love what you said, but how do I do it?" Or
Mhm.
they would give me a situation. Well, this person said this, and almost like they're testing me. So can I respectfully disagree with them? Right. And so we'd have the conversation. So I wrote the book to help and answer the question for our participants and people who've been in our sessions. And the third reason I wrote it is I've just been seeing what's going on in our society, not just US,
Yeah.
globally, around disagreement and around what's, from the most serious of topics to, who's the GOAT, right? Regarding Brady or Mahomes, right? Or all these other things. And um,
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to lean in to help give a heart-based approach to this conversation. There's a lot of great books on what to do in terms of when your body does something, the physiological aspects, to take deep breaths, to walk away. A lot of really great books on that. But I didn't see a lot of great books about how do you make it just a part of who you are, that you're
Yeah.
constantly growing, and from a heart perspective, not in just what to do, but why you should do it to improve on the relationships that we have. So those are my three whys in writing the book.
So why do you let's talk kind of bigger picture for a second and then drill down. Why do you think it is so hard, particularly now, for us to come to a conversation in that space where we automatically say, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with Justin. I don't agree with him on something, but I'm open and I'm respectful. And I recognize that you are dynamic just like I am. And one
Yeah.
belief or one idea doesn't make us, the totality of who we are. Versus, I think what we often see right now, which is, all right, I don't agree with you on this one topic. So therefore, Justin, everything you say sucks and you suck and I don't like you and I can't have a conversation with you when like it's such a shame to me that we're missing so much in relationships and in humanity when to kind of what you said when we do that. But
Yeah.
that first part is actually hard for people right
Yes.
now.
Yeah. There's several reasons for that. One is some research around what they call the illusion of asymmetric insight. And
Mm,
what essentially the illusion of asymmetric insight is simply this. I think they could never understand me. I'm just a really complex individual, right? But I think about them like I
simple.
clearly can understand them. It's very simple. It's a
Yeah.
very normal to think how I think, right? And that's often the mistake that we first lean into is realizing that I'm complex, but you're not because I can clearly see what you can't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Going to your relationships doing that, right?
Yeah.
She'll be done very quickly. So the first is just research that talks about from a human nature perspective. Two, I
Yeah.
don't think it's a new thing. I think it's just been highlighted because we can see it
Mm,
happening more with social media and with the media talking about it. So I think we've been disagreeing the same way for many, many years. It's just been now we can see it. Now it's more exposed. But three, I think one big thing that has really impacted that is this concept called social isolation theory. And when we were isolated, especially during 2020 and the pandemic, and we had time to ourselves, one of the things that we did is that oftentimes we essentially confined ourselves to our circles of comfort, right? So who was
yeah.
in my
Truth.
quarantine community? Who was in this? Were people that I got along with, that believed like me, that thought like me, oftentimes. And so in social isolation theory, we've carried some of those traits and characteristics that we employed there into our continual living. So those are three things that really kind of immediately jump out at me. But one thing that's been big is that we started to really fuse this concept of identity and ideology. And that's why it's been really hard for people to separate the two, whether
Yeah.
they're talking to the person or it's about them, right? There's certain things that loosely couple. If I don't really care about football, whether you tell me Pets, Brady or Mahomes, I don't really care. I may have a disagreement with you. But if I'm a hardcore Patriots fan and you try to tell me, well, you've seen some people around sports that, New York and Boston. I remember one person, she said, I would never marry somebody from Boston, right? And she was not joking, right? It's because we've connected the identity and ideology of people. We haven't learned how to separate the individual from their ideology. So what's
Or
one way
ourselves,
that
right?
say it again?
Or I would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but or ourselves from our ideology and our identity. I
100%.
think we've become, not only do I see you as, excuse me, your ideology, but I see myself as that too.
100%. Especially things that I hold to be true and valuable. And so I want to make this statement because I've been kind of getting a little bit challenged by this statement about we just need to be more open-minded, right? That sounds really good. It's like one of those platitudes you talked about, right? It sounds really good. Just be more open-minded.
But what does it mean?
I do think there are some things that we can learn and listen and engage more, but I'm very close-minded on some things in my life, and almost everyone else is. But even when we're close-minded, we should still always be open-hearted. What does that mean? That means that, one, I can always learn from someone, even if I'm learning what not to do. Think about all of us. We've had leaders that we were under their leadership, and we're like, oh, I'll never do that again. Or when I'm a leader, I'm not going to do X. Two, as we engage these types of people, it's when we're confident in who we are that we are able to confidently allow other people to be who they are. How do we get to that place? Let me be very clear. I have a therapist. I've had a therapist for years. I consistently have therapy. I love therapy. I don't just go to therapy because something's wrong with me, even though my kids will say that. But I go to therapy to keep things going right with me. And that's helped me in my self-awareness. The more confident people are in who they are, they don't have to beat somebody over the head with what their ideology is and their viewpoints. Lastly, I'll say this on this point. Sometimes we're just seed planters. We've created a society that we have to have it now. I have to be the link that changes you. Me telling you this. Now, I can tell you a story we shared in a book. One of my former colleagues was a former skinhead. And I was very fascinated about his story, how he got into it, how he got out of it. And I took the time just to listen and learn. And as he shared his story, I started digging into how he got out. And he was like, Justin, I love when people called me names. I loved when they would call me bigot and misogynist and racist. Like, he's like, I love that stuff. That fueled me. He said the thing that was a catalyst for change for me was the very same people that I demeaned and disrespected still chose to show me respect, value, and dignity. He's like, they'll never know that. But because it was just chance encounters. But those are the moments that he couldn't compute, continuing to demean and disrespect the same people that chose to respect him, which leads me to respect is always a choice. It is a choice. We call it the distant cousin of forgiveness, right? Because we finally realize forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about me. And that's the same thing with respect. Let's get off of this moment that you need to earn my respect. Why? Where did we learn this concept of that some person has to earn our respect, rather than we can choose to freely give it to them because they are a human being? And I'll stop there because there's some practical ways to do that. But that's the premise of that everybody is deserving of respect, value, and dignity, even those you vehemently disagree with.
So I just want to share a personal story real quick on that, and then I want to dig into the how. So I am pro-choice. So, and abortion, not abortion, is a very testy topic with people, right? And people are very dug in. And I have a lot of people in my world who are not, right? They're very it's pro-life and right. And it's been fascinating because I'll never forget, we're all sitting in the kitchen, and typically it's not something that gets brought up because we know, right? We know we're not going to agree. We know there are a million other things for us to connect on. Let's just leave this topic aside, right? So I have my reasons and they have theirs, but the moment that was so powerful for me and in my relationship with them was when I said, help me understand why. And I understood the rationale behind it. So I do not agree with them on the surface of how I would approach this subject. I never will. But what I do have now more than I ever had in the past is total respect for why they believe what they believe and how they got there. So, and that, I think, whether you get that respect back from someone or not is not the point, I think, anyway. But it really is life-changing for you on the inside when you start to treat other people's opinions, ideas, perspective, experiences with respect. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. But as you were saying that, I was thinking about that kitchen moment of me really being like, oh, I get it. I get where you're coming from. And I'm willing to get where you're coming from. Because to your point, that's my
Right.
choice.
Yes.
I could have dug my heels in, but I chose not to.
Yeah. And a lot of people dig their heels in. And I want to give a small shifting of what you shared.
Yeah.
We don't ever have to respect the ideas, the viewpoints of the
Mm,
person, but we should always respect the person because there's
mm,
certain ideas, there's ideology, there's certain viewpoints that I just can't respect. I'm sorry, but I still can choose to respect that individual. And so, how do we do it? Right? That's really the question that a lot of people ask. Number one, I'll kind of start with the first pillar.
yeah.
I'll only give you two pillars right
Wait,
now,
can you
but
share
pillar
what
one
the
and pillar
5
five.
are?
Yeah,
Will you share what
yeah.
just
So
real quick about it's challenge your perspective, right? Hold on a second. Be the student, cultivate curiosity, seek the gray, agree to respect. Did I get them
yes,
all?
yep. Those are the five
Okay.
pillars, right? And so the
All right, take
first
it
pillar
away.
was yeah, the first pillar was the last one that we came to because there used to be four pillars, but we
Mm,
realized it was so important to the heart-based approach that it's necessary, and that's challenge your perspective. That's
mm,
before any disagreement happens. What are the things that you're doing in a consistent basis to challenge your perspective, to learn about others, to leave home base, to engage the world around you? Now, one way to practically do this is a thing that I created for myself initially because I realized I wasn't living up to my mom's ideals. And I used to call it the 6 months challenge. Now we call it the Circles of Grace challenge. And the Circles of
mm,
Grace challenge, whether you do it 6 months time frame or 12 month, is that every 6 months or 12 months, I go to events, I engage in experiences, or I connect with people in either which I don't know a lot about and or I disagree with. And I go asking two questions. What did I learn about the events, people, and or experiences? And what did I learn about myself as I experienced them?
mm. I love
I'm
that.
not going to change them. I'm not going to challenge them. I'm not going to tell them why they're wrong. I'm simply going to challenge my perspective. Now, some 6 months
Mm,
challenges, circles of grace challenges I've left, and I'm like, I absolutely still definitely disagree.
right.
And there's been others that have given me those shades of gray of like, oh, I thought it was this, but it actually is more, right? Or I was wrong. I thought this perspective, but it was different. So the one is, are we consistently building a habit in our lives that we
Mm,
do that? Because why is that important? That's important because as we engage with people that we will disagree with on topics, we've already been doing the practice. Our muscles have been exercised in hearing
yeah.
perspectives that are different and listening and learning and being a student, right? Which leads me to the last pillar, which pillar 5 is agree to respect, is that even if I get to the point that I still disagree with them, right? That I still don't value their viewpoint, I can still always value them. Now, how do we do that? We call it the 3FA framework, is that I can 100% fully acknowledge you, whether you completely disagree with you, or partially disagree, or I 100% agree. I have the power to choose to fully acknowledge you. How do I do that? Something as simple as like, wow, thank you for sharing that. I've never heard that perspective before. Or, wow, like I know this is a really difficult conversation for us to talk about. I really appreciate you leaning in. Now, or thank you. If they said three things, thank you, because the number two, what you shared, I'm really with number two. Like I really can connect with you on number two. Guess what I didn't say in all those three things? I didn't say
I
I
agree.
value your viewpoint. I didn't say I agree with you. I simply
Yeah.
shared I value you. Now, when people feel like they're fully acknowledged,
Mm,
and you can even do the extra step with what you did, it's like, oh, I can see how you got there, right? People are more willing, so much of the research shows, to have more conversations. It's called conversational receptiveness. More conversations with people when they feel like they felt understood, even if the person disagreed with them. And so that's one thing that we can always choose to leave people with is one full acknowledgement. And so
mm,
that's one of the ways that we can. That's one of the things that we can do. But it comes back to I think Caitlin's questioner that talked about the slippery slope. But
mm.
oftentimes we don't want to do that because we're afraid that if I acknowledge them, they're going to think that I agree with them, and they're going to think that they're right because we're trying to win a battle rather than engage in true humanity. And that's the premise.
Don't you find that oftentimes the reason those conversations don't connect, or you don't connect with a human the way you want to, because I'd like to give us all the benefit of the doubt and say that we want to have those connections. But I think it's part of
Yes.
human design, right? We want
Yes.
relationships with people. Is that we go into them trying to convince. So like, I believe
Yes.
that I have to convince you that my opinion, my idea, whatever it is, right, is, or my perspective on it is right. Where if I just went in saying this is mine and that's yours, the conversation and the connection would be so much more meaningful than this kind of convincing model we've gotten into.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I think that's brilliant, because that's, that's what stops many times, is everybody's trying to convince. That's why pillar number 2 for us is really important. That's the actual first disagreement, is be the student. It's when we
Yeah.
focus in on learning and listening rather than lecturing. And there's just a different posture you take. And all of us have been in school at times. There's a different posture you take when you're listening and learning rather than when you're lecturing. And if we even go into it, not that this is mine and this is yours, if we went into it like, I want to better understand yours, right? Because there's still like a divide of here. But when I go into a student, like, oh yeah, help me understand how you got there. Help me, this exact thing that you did, which I love, I thought was brilliant, right? It's like, help me understand. What do most people want to do with people? They want to help them, right? So even that language around help me understand is brilliant, because now a person becomes a lecturer. Now, I want to be very clear. I've also encountered, and we didn't realize this initially until we dug deeper into research, that we initially were just trying to help people to move from disrespectful disagreement to respectful disagreement. The aggressive kind, name calling, not valuing.
Yeah.
But we realized there's a whole other category called disrespectful agreement. And that happens in 2 different ways. One, it's what the younger generation calls gaslighting, where I can say, Caitlin, I think that idea was really great. But then I'm talking to Maggie. I'm like, Maggie, I don't know what Caitlin was thinking. I think that's a stupid idea, right? Where we agree, and that happens a lot of meetings and team meetings, where we agree in public, but we really don't agree. Or on the opposite side of the spectrum is the person who hasn't learned how to exercise their voice yet. They may have been told as a child, children should be seen and not heard, right? Or they saw disagreement handled in very harmful ways as a child growing up, or in their early career. And so they tend to just go along to keep things steady.
Yeah.
To not
Nobody
rock
wants
the
to rock
boat.
the boat. Yeah.
No conflict, they're conflict averse. And then unfortunately they're disrespecting themselves in the disagreement, is because they're not sharing their true heart. So why do I say that? Is because yes, there are times when we go in and we're listening and learning, but one thing that we can do is like, it's a dialogue. It's not a monologue, right? And so if you feel it's important enough to share your perspective, I always encourage people to ask to share your perspective. I know that's counterintuitive to our society today, because we're just going to tell people, I can go on social media and tell you exactly what I think about you, and you can block me or whatever, but I'm going to go on some. But I asked people, I was like, hey, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Would you be open to hearing mine? Now, what that does is that opens someone up to agree to hear my perspective. And 9 times out of 10, almost time, people are saying yes. But they have now given me permission to share. The few times that they've said no, then I said, hey, I understand this may not be the right time. And if you ever want to talk about it, again, I'd love to have the conversation. I don't want to waste my time.
Language.
Thank you.
What's that?
What do you love about it, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I think that it takes people off the defense. So if you're sharing something, instead of, let's say you say to me, Tamara, I really don't like that painting behind you. And it's too colorful. I don't like sceneries and boats. I don't know, whatever it is. And if I say to you, if I immediately respond back with, well, I got it because it really reminds me of that time, and I'm fighting you. I'm fighting your perspective. Where I feel like saying, hey, really interesting perspective on that, Justin. Do you mind if I share mine with you? I'm not fighting what you said. I'm simply telling you how I feel. And I think that's
100%.
a big difference. And I think permission is important. And by the way, if someone says no, if you said no, I don't really want to hear it. well, then you know where
Yeah.
they stand. I mean, I think that's actually helpful.
Yes. No, I don't need to waste my time.
Yeah.
And to give that the gray space in what you shared, if somebody said, "Hey, I don't like that painting behind you," if you're open to this conversation, because not all the time we're open to it at every moment. So I'm very clear. It is not all the time. My first response back wouldn't be about my share my perspective. My first response back, "Oh, tell me why,"
Mm,
because we have no idea. They may say something like, "Wow, like my dad was abusive to me, and he used to do paintings like that.
mm.
And every time I
Great
see a
point.
painting like that, it's
Yeah.
really triggering," right? And so I may have gotten out of sorts, and I don't even know why this person doesn't
Right.
like the painting, right? And so
I love
I'm
that. Yeah.
that curiosity, which is pillar 3, is cultivate your curiosity, where we fill in the gaps with curiosity, not conclusions. But
Mm,
oftentimes we're just on autopilot and we assume we know exactly what the person is thinking or why they don't, based upon past data, past people saying something. Oh, other people have said that before, whatever,
right.
versus asking the question and being more curious. So that's where I would kind of give that first, even before sharing my perspective. I want to fully understand theirs,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
if I fully understand theirs, the research shows they're more likely to want to or are open to hearing mine.
Well, I think that what I've come to realize is that people actually don't need to be right. They need to be valued and heard, which is, I think, a little bit about what you're saying here. A lot about what you're saying. Yeah. I
Yeah.
just we think people need to be right. I don't. That's not my experience in work, in
Yeah.
life. And it's funny. My kids, well, my whole family, my husband too, has a running joke with me because they'll say something and there's a pause, and instead of arguing, debating, whatever, I'll just go, "Oh, tell me more." And they
Yeah.
jokingly will come back to me and say, "Did you just tell me more me?" Because I do it to clients, I do it to everybody. But the point is, right, I've to your point about curiosity is I've really worked hard to say, "Hey, what that person just said to me is on the surface. So let's
Yeah.
dig a little bit before we even start the conversation, because down here underneath in the roots, that's the conversation that we need to be having. It's really not the conversation on the surface." And your painting thing was a great example. And I just shut it down. I was like, "Well, you don't want to talk about it? Fine. I'm out.
Right.
Peace out." Right. But but really what you're saying is maybe I should have and you're right, taken a moment and said, "Oh, that's interesting, Justin. Like what is it about that makes you say that?"
Yeah.
Before I even said, "Can I share my perspective?" And sometimes I find, and I struggle with this, I'm going to be totally honest with you.
Mhm.
I struggle not talking. Like sometimes
Yeah.
just shut up. Your opinion's
Yeah.
not needed in the moment. Let them have their
Yes.
moment. And that's, to
Yes.
me, it's hard.
Oh, let me give you a tool. So we created this
Yeah.
framework, this tool called the Power of 3, to help us do that. Because I also struggle with the
So
same,
hard.
right? It's we call it double Dutch communication, because
Mm.
if you don't know what double Dutch is, single rope is one rope, double Dutch
Yeah,
is
yeah.
two ropes, and
Please.
somebody waiting to jump in, like, right? And
Yeah,
that's
I was
often how
so
we
good.
communicate, right? We're waiting to jump in, waiting to share our perspective, waiting to share our
Yeah.
viewpoint, why we disagree. And we created this thing called the Power of 3, because we in our research we found that people normally listen to what we call Power of 1 or Power of 2. So we're having a conversation. I'm like, "Hey, how was your day today?" And you're like, "My day's great." I'm like, "My day's great too." That's Power of 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
"How's your day today?"
Mm.
"Oh, my day's great." "What made your day great?" "Oh, I heard this interesting bald headed speaker." "I remember that bald headed speaker." That's Power of 2. Rather than continuing to what we call level 3
Mhm.
listening,
And then what
where
did he
we've
say
gotten
that
at
was
least
so great?
third. Yes, right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, what did he say? Right. It allows at least that third level that we're going beyond the surface to getting to a
I love that.
place
Yeah.
of not just communicating, but comprehension. And that
Mhm.
for us is so valuable when I can start to comprehend why you said that. And I love we actually utilize that phrase. We call it the power phrase in the book. If you don't know what to say "tell me more," right? So I love that
Yeah.
we're in alignment there. Like, tell me more, because sometimes we don't know what to say. It could be, "Oh, tell me more about that." And they
Yeah.
keep going, right? Because in our society, we've conditioned people that we really don't care what you think. And people are willing and waiting to jump in. And so it's, if I say, "Oh, I went to this great seafood restaurant." Normally we don't say,
Okay, great.
right. We say, "Oh, great." Or we say, "But have you been to this one?"
All right.
Right?
Now we're arguing.
Rather,
Yeah.
100%. "Well, you must not have been to this one because you would have," rather than, "What made the seafood restaurant great for you?" These are the things, the practice. So I want people who are listening and watching to practice today the level 3 listening, to listen to the power of 3, where you've at least gone to the third level of the conversation before you jump in to share your perspective, to offer your viewpoint and even your perspective, even if you disagree and or agree.
So there are so many nuggets. I'm going to loop this back for a second to something that we were talking about in the beginning and that you said about starting even work meetings with, how are you today before
Yeah.
you even dig into the work. But I want to layer on what you just said, which is the power of 3, because how many times if you sat down in a meeting with someone and said, how are you? And they're like, I'm okay. And then the person goes, okay, good, good. So as we're looking at this PowerPoint presentation and the person on the other end's like, I just said, I'm okay. And
Yeah.
nobody was listening, or even if I said
Yeah.
I'm great. And so if you're out there watching this or listening to this, I really do the power of 3, like do it intently, and you'll be amazed what you learn about people. I'll just tell you,
Yeah.
I'm not as intentional as you are about it. I think after this podcast interview, I'm meeting you. I'm going to get a lot better at it. I will, though,
Yeah.
often at gas stations, talk to the person behind the counter because
Yeah.
nobody ever said, they say, how are you? And I say,
Right.
I'm fine. And they say, that'll be 425. And I say, great, right? That's how our interactions go. So every now and again, I often, like, if you're behind the counter, you'll say, how are you? And I'll say, or how's your day? I'll just say, how's your day
Yeah.
going? I'll say, my day is great. How's your day going? And then they'll
Yeah.
say, well, it's pretty great. And then I'll say, well, what makes it great? Like, what is it? And then,
Yes.
and one guy said, I'll never forget him because he said, I got up early today. I got to spend some time with my girlfriend. We sat and watched some Netflix before I came to work. And I was like, awesome. What's your favorite show? We got in this whole conversation while my family's out in
Yeah.
the car, like, she's talking to somebody again. But he looked, just here's the thing, that the reason I share the story with you is he looked shocked at
Yeah.
my question because
Yeah.
nobody ever said to him, how's your day going back? So I think, Justin, that's why your work is so important, because it gives us a framework to create such meaning and value in people that I think, like I said, I think we just don't quite know how to get it. And I think we've dug ourselves into this discord, into this hole that we want out of, but we don't know how. So I think your book and your work does that.
Thank you so much. And I love your example because you're practicing the true essence of leaving people better than you found them. All right.
Mhm.
It doesn't always require, a long or deep conversation. It could be simple as a smile or, wow,
Yeah.
thank you for working today. We really appreciate it. Right. Even those simple moments, what we call meaningful moments, are so powerful. And so I want to give you, your listeners, especially leaders, 2 other practical ways to lean into this.
Yeah.
One is we're challenging leaders to move away from the concept of the open door policy.
Mhm.
Open door is great. We've talked about it. We even have virtual open door office hours from Monday through Friday, 3 to 5. I'm on Zoom or Teams, right?
Yeah.
But open door implies reactivity. It's passive. We're
Mm.
challenging leaders to do what we call an out the door policy, where we intentionally go out of our doors to go and hear the stories, the experiences, engage with our team in meaningful ways. You may say, Justin, well, that sounds like a lot. How do I do that? How to practically? Well, we created this only math you'll do today, but we created a formula called 1MC/W, which stands for one meaningful connection per week. What if you built into your calendar 15 to 20 minutes? You could put whatever day, you can find a day that you intentionally go out and have a conversation that's meaningful. Hear the story, ask questions, learn, be the student from others. And you may say, Justin, that's too much. That's 52.14 times a year with leap year. Then do one meaningful connection per month. Flip the W upside down. Maybe it's one lunch meeting a month where you're talking to a team member, somebody you serve, right? And you're just saying, hey, I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to see what your aspirations are. What are the things that you want to see happen in the company? How can I be a better leader? All of these things are practical things, but the intentionality, you hit on the nail, the intentionality of building it into our calendar, what Stephen Covey talked about, putting in the big rocks first, because we know as leaders, there's going to be a whole bunch of little rocks. And if we
Always.
don't do those things that are meaningful and that matter, we're going to build very short lives with our team members rather than longer lives. And there's things I need to do better as a leader. I know that even with my team, right? And so as I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh, I need to do better on this. And the last thing I'd say on this for leaders, key, very, very key for everybody who's listening, we're not always going to get it right. I didn't write this book to make perfect people, because I'm still not. While writing the book, I respectfully disagree. On my writing retreat, I disrespectfully disagreed with someone. So I'm not saying this is a call to perfection. It's not. But in vulnerability, I came back and I realized I was operating from superior self, and I was better
Mm,
than, and how dare they think that? And I had to come back to equal self. And I started going back through the pillars. I became a student. I started asking questions. I was more curious instead of concluding. I sought the gray, trying to figure out, is there some common ground or something that we're not even reaching with just my point and your point, but what's our point? And then we agreed to respect. So as leaders, if we can choose to be vulnerable, to apologize when we've been off, when we've been wrong, when we've disrespectfully disagreed, even in our team, and that's even us as parents. I've
yeah.
disrespectfully disagreed with my kids, and I've had to come back and apologize to them, um, because I felt it was important, and I want them to know Daddy's not always right, but Daddy is working to get better. That's what we can do as leaders, to be a little bit more vulnerable, to show the humanity and value of the people.
Can we just can I practice the power of 3 on the topic of apologizing for a moment? So I'm
Please.
gonna ask a couple more questions. I Why do you think apologizing, a meaningful apology, is so important for both people or everybody involved in that moment?
One, I think apologies show that you're willing to truly have a dialogue. And what I mean by dialogue, often when we don't apologize, we operate from monologues. It's like social media. I post something and I'm done with it, rather than realizing, wow, one, this is a true dialogue, that there might be a different perspective, and or I actually could be wrong, which I'm often. Two, I think apologizing is super important because it shows vulnerability. We all know we're not perfect. We all know our leaders aren't perfect. We trust our leaders more when they're willing to admit it.
Yeah.
And that's that secret sauce. We think that we're actually, it's harming us. It's harming us by not apologizing, because people are talking about it. They just might not be talking about it with us. So I think the second
Isn't that
reason
the truth?
is that, yeah, it's about
Yeah.
vulnerability. And the number three, it takes us out of superior self. Like we talk in the book about these three selves: superior, equal, and inferior self. And our goal as people will never 100% stay in this space, but this is spend more time in equal self. That no matter who we encounter, no matter who we engage, that we're not more important than them, superior, and they're not more important than us, inferior. But that I can learn something from them and they can learn something from me, equal. And so it allows us to spend more time in that space and practice it more. So that's one why I think apologies are really important. And for parents, I want to state this, and
Yeah.
for parents, it's super important because it teaches our kids that it's okay to apologize, to be wrong. And what Carol Dweck has talked about with growth and fixed mindset, we don't apologize because we've been conditioned by the fixed mindset that we
Yeah.
have to be better than other people around us, that we have to look good. We can't compromise their perceived intelligence. Versus, if I don't know something, I don't know it yet. And if I've gotten it wrong, it's just another data point that I can get better. Those are very important reasons to better apologize.
One last question on this before we move on, because I know we're a little bit over on time here, but it's so good. What do you think makes a good and a bad apology?
There's a lot of things, but I'll limit it this way. I'll start with bad, and then I'll say good. A bad apology is where you blame the other person in your apology. Wow, I'm so sorry that you felt that way. I'm so sorry
That's
that you were offended. Right? All of those where we put the blame and the emphasis on the other person because that person doesn't feel seen, valued, and or heard. So that's one aspect of a bad
yeah.
apology. The opposite of that, in terms of a good apology, is where we can take ownership of the experience, not how the person feels, but of the experience. So, wow, I am so sorry. I had no idea that I made you feel that way. You see, a true good apology can say, you felt that way. I was a part of that. That I can't affect your truth. But when I take ownership, guess what? I now plant a seed for us to dive deeper. Now, if it was really that person, the conversation will spell that out. Because I've had
Yeah.
many conversations where I've taken ownership and they were like, actually, no, I was just going through something. I am so sorry. But when we immediately get defensive and create the wall, oh, you feel that way. Now the person feels like they have to prove themselves. They become defensive. And now it becomes more of a battle versus softening our approach. Saying, hey, I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. What could I have done better? Because sometimes we just don't know. Right. And so until we know, we can't fully give a full apology. Right. Because we also
Yeah.
know the fake apologies where a person just apologizes just to get it done and shut us off. But
Yeah.
the good apology is where we ask for more information. What could I have done differently? Not in a defensive way. Well, what could I have done differently? Right. Said differently. Wow, I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. That definitely wasn't my intent. And I realized as you shared, I realized the impact. Can you help me that I can approach it differently next time?
So can I add to that too? Because
Please.
I think
So much about
apologizing. Yeah, I mean, we can have a whole podcast on that. I'll just say that. Yeah, it's a whole podcast. I'll just say that I think apologies that end with a lot of justifications really minimize the apology. Like, I'm so sorry I said that to you, but this happened, but then happened, but I was feeling this way,
Yeah,
but that happened. Whether I blame you or not, it's like,
yeah,
okay, but my action, okay, I don't like the way I behave, but my actions were justified.
yeah,
Um, where I think an apology where it's like I end with the apology. I am sorry that I said those things.
yeah.
Like, I'll
Period.
tell you real quick. 'Cause I'm all, as you tell, like I have no filters whatsoever. It's a problem. I had a friend. I went over to her house. She had one of those plug-in Glade thing, whatever they're called, and I didn't
Mhm.
like the smell. And
Yeah.
I said out loud, I said, "This smells like an Uber driver who smokes, who's trying to cover up the smell in here. Horrible. Like,
Wow.
how horrible is it?" Right?
Uh-huh.
I was not my
Yeah.
best self in that moment, Jess. Okay, this
Yeah.
was during COVID. So here I am. I'm justifying my behavior. So
Yeah.
right after I did it, I knew, right? Like I knew in my heart, that's not the person I want to be. That's not like how I want to
Yeah.
treat somebody ever. And I called her and I said, I just want to say, I am so sorry. That was not okay. It was not nice. I apologize. Like just
Yeah.
full stop. Right. And she was like, oh, I didn't even think twice about it. I mean, she's one of my best friends, but it was just, and I'm not saying I do everything right because I do not. But it was, you can tell those apologies from the one that's like, I'm so sorry I said that about the taxi driver thing, but I was having a bad day. I was tired. That scent was really overwhelming. Like, that's not an apology, I think.
Yeah. Can I ask you a
So,
question? What was
yeah.
your catalyst? Because not everybody would do what you did. Not everybody would
Mm,
call and admit they're
right.
wrong. They probably just try to brush it under the rug. So what was the catalyst
Mhm.
that made you say, you know what, let me take the action to call her and apologize?
So, it's a good question. So I hold myself to a very high standard of integrity and accountability and alignment. And I
Mm,
guess for me, what that means is my inside, my outside match. And when those things,
mm,
because to your point, we don't always get it right. So
yeah,
when those things, when I behave in a way that's coming from a primal place, or like you said, an inferior or superior place, that's not
yeah,
who I strive to be and who I believe to be on the inside. So when I behave that way, it really sits with me.
yeah,
And I need to resolve it. And I think that there's a few times where I've apologized to people for something I've done or said where I felt like it wasn't the right thing, and I
yeah,
did it. So I guess for me, it's in some ways selfish. Like I don't want to be that person, and sometimes we
yeah,
behave in a way that isn't in alignment with who we want to be as a human, and we all do it, right? So that's okay. It happens, but I think you have to
yeah,
own it. So that's why, I mean, I'll always apologize if I believe I did something wrong. I don't really have an issue with it. I have an issue with whatever I did.
I love that.
Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You you sparked something in me about 'cause I was listening and I was listening. What are the things that stop some people from
Mm,
doing exactly what you did and modeling that behavior? And I think one of the things, and, we talked a little bit about it in our last book, was intent and impact. Is
mm.
that we sometimes pull those two together versus seeing them as two very different things. Is that we're
Huh.
often trying to justify our intent, and we're not
Oh, yeah.
validating that that might have been the person's impact. And
Mhm.
so when we can separate the two, I think, for those who are struggling with apologies, especially when you didn't mean to do anything, right? And
Yeah.
because that's often why we don't, is because we think that a person's calling our intent into question. And so I think that's one that can help us from a why I don't apologize is saying like, hey, that person, even if I had the best intent, it may have still materialized into a bad impact. And we know that because we've been in those experiences
Right.
where it's been done to us, right?
Yeah,
Where
of
a
course.
person had
Yeah.
a great intent and impact. The other side of that is if we are confronting a person, I'd love
Right.
for us to consider one thing that I don't always do this. I often do, and I'm trying to do more and more, is do the two statements. One, I first ask, can I share some feedback with them? Again, that's a big
Mhm.
piece permission to your point. And then two, I not only assume, but I communicate positive intent. So
Hmm.
I may say something in terms of like, hey,
That's
like
important.
I know that you probably didn't mean this and that you had the best of intentions when you da da da. I have now just diffused the aspect that is going to communicate potential defensiveness. And
Right.
so just being able to communicate that there's very likely that they had the best of intent, that they didn't mean it, that it helps in having a genuine conversation. That may lead to more apologies or not, but I think what you being that model for us and showing that we can apologize, that we want to match the inside and outside is truly a heart based approach, and I thank you for leading in that.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing all this. I don't know that I've even shared that story, and when I tell my friend Kelly that I shared it, she'll laugh because I will tell you she wasn't fazed by my comment. So it's not even about is the other person mad at me, I think, from my
Mm,
perspective, so my
yeah.
experience. All right, we could go on. This has been amazing. I have learned, so I'm gonna go listen to this and take notes because I think not only did we not only was the conversation, I think exactly what you're talking about, which was open and
Mm,
honest and vulnerable and sharing of those stories, but also you had some real takeaways in there of how to deal with things.
mm,
And like you said in the beginning, we're in a place where that disagreement is holding us back from having meaningful relationships.
yeah.
And that is not the life that I think any of us want to lead, whether that's work or home or whatever. So go listen, go take notes. All right, Justin, I'm going to end with, it's been so great. Tell me about why you love climbing. And I think you said trekking at some point in something I watched.
Yeah. Well, I for several reasons it's it's been something that I can't really fully explain it. It makes me feel different. Mountains are powerful. I remember when I see mountains wherever I go, whether I'm in Utah or Colorado or other places I see mountains, I'm like, oh. And I started this off with a birthday challenge, right? So every birthday I challenge myself to do one thing I've never done.
Mm.
But I always thought about doing. I got married 2 weeks ago. That wasn't the birthday challenge, by the way. But I
Oh,
got married
Justin,
and
well, congratulations.
thank you. Yes, I got married 2 weeks ago, and so my wife's birthday challenge was the Spartan race. So you'll see that on my LinkedIn. I just did a whole
Love
video
Spartans. Yeah,
about the
yeah.
Spartan race. But my birthday challenge was I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. That was one of my birthday challenges. And I'd never done anything to that degree, and I started training. It took a year to prepare and learn how to camp and
Yeah.
backpack and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. I loved it. And I loved it so much that it sparked other things. And so I did the Grand Canyon and Machu Picchu and just
Oh,
came back
Grand
from
Canyon.
Patagonia, and I'm preparing for um, the Lost City in Colombia.
Mm,
For me,
amazing.
I call it in our first book, Here Why Matters Now, we call it achievement hobbies. So, what are things that allow you to achieve that have a carryover effect in other aspects of your life? And that's one of those things where it's tough, it's a struggle, you work through it, but then you get to that destination, you get to that place, and it gives you a sense of achievement, appreciation, and that's a carryover into the rest of your life.
Oh my gosh, this is a whole nother conversation we could have too, but I thank you for sharing that. I think people's hobbies say a lot about them. So it's fascinating to
Yeah.
hear kind of you talk about it. All right. I can't believe we went so over, but it was so good. So Justin, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining. I know you said well, this will go live. I mean, I'll cross the podcast tomorrow. So right before your book comes out. So we'll put a link to the book
Perfect.
out
Thank
everywhere.
you. Yeah.
Thank you. This was, like I said, I think it's going to transform a lot of people's lives and how they approach their day, which was all we have sometimes, right? It's like, what's happening today?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I appreciate your heart behind this,
Mm.
your passion, and we want to reward people. So for those who are ordering the book, just send us an email if you order the book through Amazon or wherever you order it, whether Audible's coming next, but Kindle, other things. Just shoot us an email at books@Work.Meaningful, and we'll actually send you a kind of exclusive video where we're fully describing the
Awesome.
pillars in a deeper way.
Okay.
So thank you for your time. You're awesome and amazing, and thank you for elevating our conversation with your heart.
Oh, thank you.